Okay, this is Jim Wendt. For the record, I have begun the recording. On the line are all 10 commissioners: Lenny Brayman, Kathy Braun, Mark Corcoran, Meg Francis, Steve Levy, Tom Noonan, Matt Wagner, Mike DiGiacomo, Peter Elliott, and Freda Gordon. Also on the line is Emmeline Harrigan, our Assistant Planning Director. And with that, I will turn things over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Wendt. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. I navigated the personal unmute successfully.
Very well.
Yeah. So thank you for that introduction. This is the Fairfield Town Plan and Zoning Commission meeting, April 28, 2020. We are in unprecedented times, and I apologize to my fellow commissioners for not having been at the last telephone conference, which we had. So this is my first, and I can tell you it is pretty strange to be trying to lead a meeting like this without seeing everyone, and even if that is on video conference. And we're going to try and implement those features going forward, if not only just for the commissioners to be able to see each other and for the members of the public to see the commissioners as we go through this process. But thank you for everyone for joining, including members of the public who have dialed in. We have tried to attend to the business of the commission that needs to be routed through the system here, and that we have on tap as best we can. So the first meeting on our agenda, or the first item on our agenda, is Bills and Communications, which is 777 Commerce Drive, the request of Scala Partners Abbey Road Advisors for a 50% release of a $666,055 bond pertaining to special permit improvements in the designed commercial district, TOD Development Park, Trademark 2.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Wendt. For the record, this is you have in your backup packet material an email from Laura Pooley from the Engineering Department outlining that she is satisfied that at least 50% of the bonded improvements have been completed thus far. If you haven't seen the construction thus far, I would suggest you take a drive by and see how that's shaping up. It is quite a large bond, $666,000. We will still have $333,000 remaining after if you should release this bond. But the engineering department is recommending a 50% release, and we concur with that recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
This is Meg.
Yeah.
Move to approve.
Thank you. And so your motion is to approve the bond release in the amount of $333,027.50?
Yes.
Thank you. Can I have a second?
This is Mark Corcoran. I'll second.
Commissioner Corcoran, thank you very much. And so this is an interesting way of doing this because I can't see people and recognize people, and there's no way for people to raise their hand. So I'm terribly sorry, everyone, but it's going to have to just jump in there. We have such an organized way of conducting these meetings, which doesn't work in this format. So thank you for doing that. So we have a motion to release by Commissioner Francis and a second by Commissioner Corcoran. Any comments or discussion?
Simply that the town engineer has approved the work done to the town's satisfaction.
Thanks. I can tell everyone I personally have driven past this construction site many times over the last couple of months, and actually had appointments in the medical building that's directly adjacent to it, and the construction is proceeding at a swift pace and is coming along quite nicely. So I support this one. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion to release is approved unanimously. The next item on our agenda is old business, and I'll just call them together, although we don't need to, and I don't know that we vote on them together, but Mr. Wentz Summary, I believe, is going to speak about them together. 2A, zoning regulation amendment application of BlackRock Realty LLC to amend section 21.16 of the zoning regulations, Transportation Commercial Park, and 160-219 Ash Creek Boulevard, special permit and coastal site plan application of BlackRock Realty LLC pertaining to the construction of a mixed-use commercial and residential development in the Design Industrial District Transportation Commercial Park.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Jim Wendt again for the record. Yes, there are two matters that needed to be voted on separately here. The regulation amendment package first, followed by the special permit proposal. I'm going to go through the staff comments for both in their entirety to kind of put it all into context, but you will need, as you stated before, two separate votes, one first for the zone regulation amendment, and then thereafter you can proceed to the special permit. So having said that, so before examining this application before you, let's take a look back at the origin of the regulations that came before. The Transportation and Commercial Park regulations found in Section 21.16 of our regulations were adopted by the Commission in October of 2002. That section provides for an overlay for within the Design Industrial District to allow a greater development opportunity for office, research and development, and retail uses in anticipation at that time for the new Fairfield Metro train station while maintaining the underlying industrial district, and that specifically excluded residential uses. The application for the original Metro Center development was submitted in March of 2005. That proposal included an application for qualification as a transportation and commercial park, a special permit, and a coastal site plan for nearly 1 million square feet of commercial space. In that, all of that, including the qualification for transportation commercial park designation, was approved by the Commission in July of 2005. In anticipation of that development and the coming train station, significant roadway intersection infrastructure improvements were undertaken in the surrounding street networks. 13 intersections had various levels of infrastructure improvement. The Commission undertook a planning effort to review more broadly the Commerce Drive area, since the train station was likely to be a catalyst for mixed-use investment beyond what was originally conceived by the Metro Center development. In that planning effort resulted in a POCD area update in a new Commerce Drive area design district regulations adopted by the Commission in May of 2011. Regulation amendment was to facilitate transit-oriented development, specifically allowing mixed-use projects, higher density residential opportunities in conjunction with higher design standards. Those regulations are embodied in Section 13 of the regulations. The Fairfield Metro train station opened in December of 2011. In the regulations that previously alluded to, Section 13 led to the Trademark 1 and Trademark 2 developments that were respectively approved by this Commission in 2015 and 2018. Despite the fact that the Commission approved revisions to the original Metro Center development in April of 2007, June of 2008, and April of 2012, no new construction has resulted. This Commission undertook a more recent planning effort that resulted in the adoption of a transit-oriented development study in October, this past October. The purpose of that study was, in light of the ongoing lack of large-scale office development interest, was to update the vision of transit-oriented development to best achieve the goals for a thriving revenue-generating area around the train station. Some of the study findings that are relevant to this application on page 1 of the study says that the Fairfield Metro Center, a walkable multifamily residential and mixed-use development, can create a cohesive, distinct district that enhances the town's tax base. On page 7 of the study, one of the major findings of the office market study is that the Metro Fairfield metro area needs a stronger mixed-use setting and greater walkability to be a competitive location for TOD office development, particularly in comparison to competing TOD locations elsewhere in Fairfield County. Also on page 7, the findings were the retail market study. Yep.
I don't know if it's you or me. I think it might be on my end, but the significant breaking up. I'm going to die.
Okay.
This is Tommy. Matt, I think it might be on your end. You were breaking up, and I heard Jim clearly.
Okay. Yeah, I believe he's going to dial back, so we'll pause for a minute.
Sure.
Thanks very much. I'm back in.
Okay. All right. We can hear you clearly now. Okay.
Good. Thank you.
Again, back on page 7 of the TOD study, the retail market study found that significant multifamily residential development is needed in order to generate additional demand for eat and drink and retail development. Without increased residential development in the metro station area, that increases the customer base. Further retail demand for dining would be limited, and the amenity base would be more stagnant. Continuing further on page 7, the Fairfield Metro Station needs TOD development, particularly multifamily residential and mixed-use developments, to build stronger market demand for larger-scale office and commercial development. And on page 14, the TOD development scenarios reviewed as part of that study assumed that one walkable mixed-use center would be focused along Ash Creek Boulevard and another along Commerce Drive between Kings Highway and Black Rock Turnpike. These centers would begin as independent clusters of development around walkable streets and ultimately grow together over time as additional development occurs. And finally, on page 32, the study recognizes that rather than having retail and dining uses on every site, they should be required at corners of prominent intersections in areas of high pedestrian activity. So with that as the background, let's take a look at what this actual application is proposing. So the first part of this application is a proposed set of regulation amendments. And the main thrust of the regulation proposal is to add residential use in some related design elements that are found in the Commerce Drive Area Design District section 13 and bring those into section 21. So the first in section 21.16.1, the proposal is to introduce some language talking about mixed-use transit supporting neighborhood with a mix of residential development, providing mixed income and affordable housing options to the existing kind of premise statement for the district. Section 21.16.3.1 adds residential use for one or more families as a new permitted use. Section 21.16.5.3 adds residential compliance to the lot coverage and bulk elements that are based on the entire development parcel. Again, this is one of the important distinctions between Section 21, the Transorient Development Park, and Section 13, is that the regulations require a much larger minimum parcel size of 10 acres minimum to qualify, and it was anticipated that once a development overall approval was given, that the parcel, overall development parcel, may be broken up into smaller subparcels for financing reasons or other reasons as the development occurs, but allows the overall design elements to be assumed over the entirety of the development rather than in each subset parcel. The proposal for Section 21.16.7 introduces the same parking standards for retail, office, and residential that are found in Section 13, while maintaining the current provision to aggregate the total number of parking spaces for all the uses and then multiply that by 80% for the transit reduction benefit. Section 21.16.10.1 proposes that Section 21 provisions for Transportation Commercial Park supersede Section 13 to the extent there's a conflict, since the Transportation Commercial Park overlay is also within the Commerce Drive District overlay. Section 21.16.10.5 includes a residential density provision for 50 bedrooms per acre, consistent with Section 13, also a maximum percentage of 70% of the total floor area to be residential, the same standard as currently applies in Section 13. Section 21.16.13 proposes a below market rate provision of 10% of the residential units, the same as in Section 13. Again, much of the discussion at the hearing surrounding the regulation proposal had to do with the required percentage of below market rate housing units. The proposal by the applicant mirrors Section 13 with a 10% set aside for the life of the development. There was some correspondence and testimony advocating an increase for the below market rate percentage to 15%. The applicant argued that no other regulation mandates that 10%. Our TOD study does recommend considering increasing that 10% up to 12%. But again, that's keeping in context, so that was in the context of also a proposal to increase the bedroom per acre density from 50 bedrooms per acre to 75 bedrooms per acre. So that that was the context of that recommendation. The applicant did submit a calculation estimating the increase in the percentage from 10 to 15% would cost an estimated $10.4 million over the 40-year lifespan. So the standard considerations for a regulation amendment should be familiar to you. They are: number one, is the proposal consistent with the plan of conservation development? 2, does time, experience, and responsible planning for contemporary or future conditions reasonably indicate the need for the proposed amendment? Number 3, have circumstances in the neighborhood changed substantially to warrant the requested amendment? Number 4, has it been demonstrated that the proposal is warranted and would serve the general health, welfare, and safety of the town? Number 5, does the proposed amendment promote a level of development that would serve to protect property values in the neighborhood and enhance the community and accomplish a transition in character between areas of unlike character? And 6, would the proposed amendment permit a level of development that would increase undue traffic congestion? That are the comments on the regulation proposal. But looking at the special permit overall, again, the special permit and coastal site plan proposes 357 dwelling units comprised of 5 buildings in a 118-room hotel with ancillary lounge and restaurant space. The 357 residential units are comprised of 65 studio units, 198 one-bedroom units, and 94 two-bedroom units. So overall, that's 74% studios and one-bedroom units and 26% two-bedroom units. Residential buildings 1 and 4 are oriented towards Ash Creek in the Marsh open space, and residential building 5 is oriented towards Ash Creek Boulevard. The proposal is planned to be built in phases, with the required parking being provided incrementally with each phase. Phase 1 consists of the residential building number 3 in the outdoor pool amenity area. Phase 1A includes the hotel and its related parking and site entrance. Phase 2 includes residential building number 2. Phase 3 includes residential building number 4. Phase 4 includes residential building number 1. And Phase 5 includes residential building number 5. So it's important to note that the regulation proposal requires that the residential use not exceed 70% of the total development square footage. So while the applicant is hopeful to construct the hotel use as soon as possible, perhaps as early as concurrently with the completion of the first residential building, I think you should consider a condition, should you approve this application, that the hotel be completed no later than the completion of the second residential building number 2. Additionally, looking further down the line, assuming the hotel is completed, residential use beyond Phase 3 cannot occur without additional commercial space beyond the hotel. Therefore, prior to construction of Phase 4, a final plan design submittal will be required for either the concourse building or the Point Retail building, or both, and this will require a new special permit application to be filed at that time or before. As discussed at the hearing, the disposition of the pedestrian crossing at Ash Creek Boulevard and its interface with the plaza at Building 5 would be part of that new application when that concourse proposal needs to come forward. The applicant is hopeful, consistent in what our TOD study findings were, that the initial construction of early residential phases will create demand and interest for commercial aspects of the overall development and will ultimately make this a true mixed-use neighborhood. The considerations for a special permit are found in Section 25.7.7, and that is the development shown on the site and architectural plans are such character as to harmonize with the neighborhood, to accomplish a transition in character between areas of unlike character, to protect property values in the neighborhood, to preserve and enhance the appearance and beauty of the community, and avoid undue traffic congestion. And again, I have presented to you some potential recommended conditions should you find in favor of this. Is one, again, to ensure that there's commercial occupancy and not solely residential occupancy. The hotel must be completed no later than the time of the completion of the second residential building. Second recommendation is to ensure that residential occupancy does not exceed 70% of the total development as required by the proposed regulations. No residential construction beyond Phase 3 can occur without additional commercial use in addition to the hotel. Therefore, prior to construction of Phases 4 and 5, the disposition of a new special permit for the required additional commercial space must be resolved to the Commission's satisfaction. Third, submission of an affordability management plan, including deed restrictions for the below market rates, needs to be provided based on whatever the appropriate percentage of affordability that this Commission deems appropriate. The proposal as it stands is 10%. And then lastly, portions of the residential buildings 1, 2, and 4, as well as the Point building, are in a flood zone as presently mapped. Due to grade changes from the previous activity, the applicant is proposing a letter of map amendment that needs to be processed and approved by FEMA prior to issuance of building permits for those buildings. So that, Mr. Chairman, concludes the staff comments, but again, you need to vote separately for first the zone regulation amendment before moving on to the special permit.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Wendt. I appreciate that detail and fulsome summary of both the proposed regulation amendment as well as the application. So with that, we need to take one up at a time, and we should entertain a motion with respect to the regulation amendments. And I just ask that since we do have some recommended conditions and tweaks, that if you do make a motion, then you would like to include some or all of those, that you make that clear.
This is Tommy. I would move to approve the regulation amendments. I don't believe there were conditions of conditions proposed with those. If I'm wrong, please advise.
The only piece, this is Jim Wendt for the record, the only piece with respect to the regulation is what percentage of required affordability. The applicant is proposing 10%, so you can either agree with that proposal or propose a different percentage.
Okay, this is Tommy Newman again. I would move to approve with the 10% as requested by the applicant.
Okay. Motion to approve as applied by Commissioner Noonan. Do we have a second?
Mr. Chairman, it's Mark. I was just wondering if we should consider the building first and the amendment second.
I don't think it's a fair question, and I think I have the answer to it. We can't consider the proposed the application for the special permit prior to the regulation amendment because it doesn't comply with our regulations. And so, to the extent that
Can we
you'd like
discuss them at the same
to
time,
talk
then?
about that, yeah, to the extent that you'd like to talk about the impact of the regulations in connection with the the site plan and how this applicant proposes to build within those regulations, I think that's fair game. That's certainly one way that the the practical impact of the regulations can be seen, and to the extent that that impacts the commissioner's determination of whether we want to revise the regulations that way, because it's going to result in that. I think we should discuss it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So still waiting for a second so we can get into a discussion.
This is Stephen Levy. I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Second by Commissioner Levy. And so, Commissioner Noonan, your motion, as I have typically done, if you'd like to begin, you can.
Thank you. This is Tommy Noonan again. I'm open to the 10%, 12% debate. At this point, I would consider the 10% at this point because simply we have 10% almost everywhere else in the Fairfield. I know it's fair game if they're coming to us with regulation amendments that I don't feel that it would be appropriate and essentially not a violation of due process or anything major to include 12%. But in consideration that we have 10% throughout throughout Fairfield, the recommendation for 12% is based on a higher density than what we currently have. It just struck me more fair play to keep it at 10% for them. But going back more to the general view, to hit the particular considerations, in looking at the proposed amendments, I felt that they were consistent with the plan of conservation and development. This site has been there for a long time. Our last major development proposal was back in 2005. So it's certainly in the town's interest now to have a proposal like this. And I recognize the amendments are conditioned really upon this proposal, which is why Commissioner Corcoran's suggestion really of taking them up at the same time and almost the proposal first makes a lot of sense because all these proposals are really geared towards this project. But for saying that the time, experience, and responsibility condition prong is met, as I said, I think this is in the town's best interest. I think the circumstances of the neighborhood has changed. It is between the train station, the fact that it's been vacant, and all the other developments in the area. This current proposal, this current regulation amendment for this project would be, again, to this Fairfield's benefit, and that the circumstances of the neighborhood have changed to warrant this. I believe that, as I said, it's in the Fairfield's general benefit. So it meets the fourth prong as well. Certainly, I think it would protect property values, and there was enough evidence to show there would not increase onto traffic congestion. I'm open to any specific modifications to the amendments, but overall, as I said, I felt that it was in Fairfield's best interest, considering that these regulations are for this project. Open to the 10% versus 12% discussion, though I said why I think it should be 10%.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Levy?
Yes, I concur that the essential point of the amendment to permit residential use in this area is a good one. 10 plus years ago, we considered office use there, and clearly the market has changed, and that's no longer feasible, practical, or to be encouraged in this particular site. So I certainly concur with it being residential use being allowed. I am torn on the question of the number of affordable units. Hypothetically, if someone were to build 357 units at 10%, that would be 36 affordable units. and I recognize that is our standard in other districts. But it's not an ex post facto. It's not like we're trying to apply a law retroactively, because this is a clean slate when we're basically amending the provisions for this particular district. The other extreme is 15%. Hypothetically, with 357 units, that would be 54, or roughly another 18 units. And that's certainly the applicant expressed. There's testimony is that would be very expensive for any potential developer over and above what might be contemplated. I might consider just throwing out there that if we were to make this at 11%, which we already are on record through our GOD transit study that we're planning to move towards, or it was recommended to move towards 12%, which is something we may well want to independently adopt across the board at a later date. But I think at this point, moving forward at 11%, which would be basically, hypothetically, another 3 or 4 units, that might be a step in the right direction. So I'm just throwing it out there as to whether we want to make it 10%, 11%, or such other numbers other commissioners might feel appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Levy. I can't recognize hand movements and such, so are there any other members of the commission?
Meg.
Commissioner Francis, please proceed.
I think it's a fine project, and I appreciate the depth of research that went into developing the conditions by the planning director and assistant director. Thank you. I have some thoughts that, number one, there's no provision for senior housing, and there's such a lot of pressure for that with 20% or more of the population being senior. And I agree with Commissioner Levy that maybe we should go to 11 or 12% for the affordable, because there's so little development in town, and they're all just doing 10%, or most of them are, and all it's doing is covering itself. It isn't raising Fairfield's 2.5%. But it's an excellent development, real quality, which I'm impressed with. My third concern is there's a huge amount of parking, pavement, and I got the impression from the Goody Clancy report there'd be a lot more walkways through it, little pocket parks where people could sit and gather, and it's just all parking. I don't know. It might be better having a parking garage instead of building 5. I don't know. And then planners are beginning to say that with the health conditions today, people are wanting out of big cities and into suburbs, and not going to happen tomorrow, but they think eventually there will be a demand for office space again in the suburbs. So we may not have to build Building 5. It may be, or even Building 4, it may turn out to be the office space that was originally envisioned. Who knows? But those were my concerns, the senior housing, and I do think the affordable percentage should be a little higher. It's hard to weigh all the pros and cons of it, and the huge amount of parking and no walkways. There are walkways around it, but not through it. Just so much pavement when you look at it overall. And the possible office space in the future, which of course is still allowed. But, I personally hope we can just approve Phase 1 and Phase 1A and not have to approve the whole thing right now. But I don't know how others feel. End of statement.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Francis. I have some
This is Mark.
comments about some of that, but yeah, Commissioner Corcoran, go ahead.
Go ahead with your comments if you like.
No. I mean, I'll please go ahead.
Okay. Well, I have a bunch of things, and maybe I don't need to take up everything at the same time. I can skip around. But
Okay.
The first thing is that although we need this kind of development in our tax base, I'm kind of disappointed in the vision of this development. To me, it's a residential enclave that's pushed off to the side. It's not really part of a mixed-use community that I saw in the plans with Goody Clancy. It's sort of off by itself without good integration with anything around it. I don't think it has good access to the train station. I guess if I were asked, what would I do? Well, I think I would want to look at that parcel plus the parking lot as something that should be developed in tandem. And I mean, I would guess that parking lot is owned by the state and that they would be amenable to being part, to allow a developer to participate in developing the whole thing as one thing. It just seems to me there needs to be a grander vision. If we already had zoning there that gave this kind of development a right to be there, that's one thing. But they're asking us to change our zoning specifically for them to do this. And I think there could be a lot more. At the very least, it should have a mix of residential and commercial, as is envisioned for the other areas around it. I have a couple other things too. So, are we approving all 5 phases of this at the same time? And the question I have is, are we going to be okay if it stops at the end of phase 1 or it stops at the end of phase 2? In each of those points, will we be, we're sort of looking at it as if it were all done. But I think we should look at what it would happen if it doesn't get all done, if there's just a little bit of it happening at a time. And sort of following on what Meg said, maybe we should be looking at this one at a time. Now, I can see there are downsides to that too, but I just want to put that out as a topic for discussion. I also agree with Meg that there's way too much pavement and not enough green area. And again, as I said in our last meeting, I don't think the access to the train area is good, and there are plans to make a walkway up over the raised roadway after there's future phasing, but even that I don't think is a great solution. The last thing I want to mention is I have a question for Jim. What is the density that's proposed for the current development?
The residential density?
Yeah.
It's consistent with the proposal for 50 bedrooms per acre.
Okay. All right. And then I have one other thing, and that is in Jan Reber's comments, he mentioned that one of the zoning amendments is to say that the new 26 overrides 13. It seems that, to me, it would make more sense to say that it overrides 13 for things that are discussed in the same topics, but anything in 13 that isn't discussed in 26 would stand, like design standards, so on. And those are my comments for right now.
Very good. Thank you very much. Anyone else have any response, questions, comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Lenny Brayman.
Commissioner Brayman, go ahead.
Thank you. I agree with the sentiment that the need for a residential component and mixed use with a residential component in the Metro Center area is well supported by the TOD study and consistent with the Plan of Conservation and Development. That is the essence of the regulation amendment, and so to that extent, I'm in favor of it. I think the need for residential to generate demand for commercial seems like a sound premise. I too struggled with the percentage of affordable when our town is asked to approve large numbers of new residential units. As a legislative body changing our regulations, I believe our discretion is at its peak, and I believe we would have the power certainly to increase our percentage of affordable housing required up to 15%. There were arguments made from a policy perspective that I believe were sound about going in that direction. That being said, I do hesitate to make such a change too hastily or in the context of a single text change application rather than doing it holistically or across the board. Also, the Goody Clancy study that has been referenced recommended an increase, an incremental increase up to 12%. And Commissioner Levy mentioned quite rightly that we could even go up to 11. I believe that the proposed regulation can be approved with the 10%. However, I do believe we have the authority to go higher than 10% even in this regulation, and I do believe that this is something that our commission should take up. If not in this application, then in the future, that we do consider increasing the percentage of affordable housing required in large residential developments. With respect to Mr. Corcoran's, Commissioner Corcoran's comment about the new regulation overriding or superseding Section 13, perhaps there could be a change to that paragraph that says that it supersedes Section 13 to the extent not inconsistent or to the extent that issues are not addressed in Section 13. But I don't know whether such a change would work any mischief in the regulations.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I think we've got for consideration now 2 possible amendments to the motion, one with respect to affordable units and the other with respect to the limitation on the impact of that other regulation, that section.
If I can jump in, this is Tommy Newman. I had initially thought that, at least with respect to the superseding part, that as I'm looking at it, I'm not sure if it's as explicitly as I remember, that it would only, Section 21 would only supersede if there was a conflict with Section 13. If it's not explicitly there, it should be explicitly there, or I kind of assumed it was there implicitly. But I agree that really it should only act as a tiebreaker, so to speak, that 21 supersedes 13 if there is a conflict between the 2 sections. And I said my piece already on the 10%. I'm happy to listen to the chairman and anybody else who has to speak on it.
Okay. So in the meantime, then, do you want to amend your motion with respect to the superseding regulation? 21 supersedes 13 only if in conflict?
Actually, if I may, I think that is already, I misspoke before. I believe that is already in there at 21.16.10.1. So maybe that language adequately addresses Mr. Corcoran's concern.
So 21.16.10.1.
Can you read it quickly?
Yeah, it proposes that Section 21 supersede 13 for the Commerce Drive District, since the Transportation Commerce Park overlay is also within Commerce Drive District overlay. I have to go to the language Unless Mr. Wendt, do you have it directly in front of you? I can pull it out.
I do, Mr. Chairman. This is Jim
Right.
Wendt. The proposal, as proposed, is in the event of a conflict between the provisions of Section 13 and the provisions of this section, the provisions of Section 21.16.10 shall apply. Now, that particular section is access, height, lot coverage, floor area, and setbacks. Then the proposal further goes on to say the provisions of Section 13.13 shall not apply to the transportation and commercial park. So I think there's two parts to this. One is that with respect to height, lot coverage, floor area, and setback, if there's any conflict between the provisions, and remember that this is we have a situation here where we have an overlay on top of an overlay. Going back to the history that I outlined in my earlier comments, in 2005 when the Commission approved this transportation commercial park, it was kind of a site-specific regulation amendment for a very large 10-plus acre parcel. And then in 2011, when Section 13 was adopted, that was also established an overlay within the Commerce Drive district, but also included this site. So it was kind of an overlay on top of the overlay. So what this proposal is saying that with respect to height, floor area, lot coverage, and setbacks, Section 21 applies, and then the specific design elements of Section 13.13 do not apply to this section. Now, having said that, in my opinion, 90% of the design elements of Section 13.13 are met by this application. The conflicts, the two conflicts, one was discussed during the course of the hearing where there was concern about the future commercial elements to this proposal in particular, showing at present parking between the street and the building. And there was some concern, hey, is it possible to put the parking behind the buildings as the design requirements proposed? And the answer to that was yes, the applicant thought that they could do that, but again, that would be subject to the second special permit. And as we stated before, kind of an answer to the question, are you approving all of this or just a piece of it? I think it's yes and yes, in that because of the 70% limitation on residential occupancy, they have to come back to the Commission for a formal application for those commercial spaces before they can proceed with beyond phase 3 of the residential construction. So at that time, you can address the concerns with respect to where the parking is relative to the street and so forth, which the applicant thought that they could address to your satisfaction. The other major issue, not necessarily major, is the limitation in Section 13.13 to light poles being no higher than 12 feet, whereas in Section 21 they can be at 25 feet. And just as a note, the current parking lights at the train station parking lot as they are presently are 25 feet. The other aspects of streetscape, sidewalks, building fenestration with maximum percentage or minimum percentage of ground story window, street furniture, and the like are met, in my opinion, by this site plan. So there's not a huge list of conflicts, and as Commissioner Noonan suggested, it acts as like a tiebreaker. If there's ambiguity between which section applies, in this case, this regulation would say that that it would go to Section 21. So I hope that was responsive to the question that was asked, and I'm happy to reread that language again if you need me to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wendt. Yep. Go ahead, Tommy.
Based on that, I mean, I think the language as far as the conflict, if there's a conflict, 21 supersedes is met. And with respect to the design elements of 13 not being included, based on Mr. Wendt's statements, 90% are not in conflict, and even if they are, they're minor or something along those. Based on Mr. Wendt's comments that were just said, I'm comfortable with the language as is, particularly because Section 21 is what this district is in anyway. I think it's Section 13 is while it's an overlay in the area for the trademark building, so not as if it doesn't seem as if putting in new restrictions or new design elements. They're existing elements as opposed to bringing in new ones. So I'm comfortable with the language, but I'm open to any commissioners' different opinions.
Thanks. Anyone else have any
This is Stephen
comments or
Levy.
questions? Yes, Commissioner Levy. Yeah.
In terms of eliminating the provisions of Section 13.13, that would eliminate all of the design provisions. And I'm not sure we want to do that. I mean, looking specifically at the parking issue, which provides that there'd be no parking between the street and the front of a building, which is something we are trying to accomplish in many districts. And I'm frankly not quite sure how that would even be applicable with these 5 buildings, or how that would be, that's something we could waive at a later date.
I don't think it could.
Yeah, I don't see how you could. But at the same time, is it something we should say is not applicable, or what's that? I'm sorry.
There's that commercial building that I don't think we're voting on, but the commercial one that's more across the street from the trailer that they have there, where I think they have the parking lot in the front. But I don't think that's obviously not it's not the project at least that's before us, but and I'm not sure if the amendments go to that or not, but I think that's the one area where that would affect, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I guess
that's just a question. Yeah, go ahead.
That building, though, is as Jim pointed out, it needs to be done in order for the last residential buildings to be built.
Fair point.
Right, they have to come back with a special permit application to construct the commercial building there before proceeding with additional residential buildings to maintain at least a 70% 70-30 split between residential and commercial use across the entire project.
I'd like to see some design standards here, because I'm concerned that 1 or 2 buildings get built and the hotel gets built and then it stops, and another developer comes in with another plan to finish it up. And if there are no design standards in place, then we're not going to be dealing with what this developer is proposing. We're going to be dealing with an unknown proposal. So I think we should have something in place.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have a design
make here.
It's not incorporating Section 13.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Commissioner Francis.
Is that the Point building that you're talking about, or the Concourse building? The
Point building.
Yeah, Point. I mean, Concourse.
The Point, which is a very small building. Okay. Yes, I know. I think we should keep the design standards.
Well, so the design standards, and I'll jump in here. So the design standards, as written now in 13, would not permit the development of the proposal that's before us. The parking, the first floor, the elements of mixed use within the buildings. It frankly, to my mind, that just doesn't work. And so, what we would need to do is write alternative design regulations that would which would apply to a project of multiple buildings separating residential and commercial, the way that this applicant has proposed to roll this out. So, I
misspoke.
I don't think that's feasible, right? So here, I agree. I think that Commissioner Brayman said it very succinctly that the record here for the mixed use in the ratio that the applicant's proposing here is well supported. I've been on this commission for over 10 years, and I've seen multiple iterations of proposals for development here at Metro Center, and it's been fallow for 20 years. The idea that we're waiting for the better project to come along, I think is getting very old. And we now have, for the first time in 2 decades, a developer with a plan who is prepared to invest in our town and to build what our own consultants have told us is what now is the highest and best use for this acreage immediately adjacent to the train station. The thing, about maybe now with what's happened over the last month, the economy shifting and businesses are going to want to relocate, and wouldn't this be great now for commercial, and shouldn't we wait to see whether or not we can get a commercial investor here, I think are extremely hollow, because we've been here before. This is not land that became available over the last year, 2, 3, or even 5 years. We have gone through major economic revolutions. This parcel remained fallow, through the recession, 2008-9. This is very challenging topography. It's built on a cap. The reason that there's no underground parking to speak of in a meaningful way, so we can have more green space and all that, is because there's a cap on top of the land that had to be regraded so that they could do what they're proposing. I am persuaded, at the end of the day, after having visited this site numerous times and investigating and listening to the developers over 10 years, quite frankly, that this is a very challenging topography, and that we should give the opportunity here for this developer to see whether or not we can improve this site with these buildings. And I agree that we're taking, in some ways, a risk. And I like the controls, and we'll get to the application and all of the proposed conditions for approval that we'll talk about in a moment. But with respect to the regulations, I think that they are written in a way that will enable the development of this parcel, consistent with what our own master plan talks of, and our consultants in the TOD study have now told us are appropriate. I will take issue with the affordable units, and I do think that the applicant's arguments here were misplaced. There is no due process violation. I agreed with, and I don't remember which commissioner said it. Just because it's been 10% in other areas doesn't mean we can't make it a different number here. This is our legislative capacity. We have the widest discretion. And I think it was Commissioner Francis who mentioned leaving it at 10% only deals with our requirements, meeting the affordable units that we need for the number of units that we're generating, and doesn't advance the ball any more than anymore. It doesn't advance the ball. Our own consultants recommended that we consider 12. The 15% would, in the developer's estimation, would cost $10.4 million over 40 years. It's about $260,000 a year. After 40 years, this developer they don't have any affordable restriction. All of the units revert to market rate. And so it's an investment. Does it have to be 15? No, I don't think it does. But I don't think it should be 11. I think that we ought to consider 12%, as our consultants recommended. At least there, we would gain some affordable units on the whole, across the town. With that, I agree with many of the other comments in terms of our considerations. Proposals consistent with the plan, time, experience, and responsible planning indicate need for the proposed amendment. I think we've talked that one through. Have circumstances in the neighborhood changed substantially? Well, I think the point is they haven't. Is the proposal warranted and serve the general health, welfare, and safety of the town? I mean, we heard about what the regulations would do to improve the opportunities there and the revenues for the town, given the construction and improvement of the site. That speaks to item number 5 as well. And undue traffic congestion, we heard Mr. Wendt tell us about all of the improvements that were made, and we heard from the traffic engineer about all the improvements that were made to accommodate a much more heavily congested use of this land with 1 million square feet of commercial and so forth. So the infrastructure can ably support the kind of development that's here. I think when we get to the plan, we need to really hammer home the notion of the mixed-use development and the improvements that we're all talking about with respect to the site and the design of the site, to make sure that concourse is developed, make sure that the hotel is in place before further residential, proceeds, and so forth. But those are considerations for the site plan approval. So on balance, and I appreciate everyone's comments, I would recommend that Commissioner Noonan amend his motion to adopt the regulation amendments, but change 10% to 12% affordable units.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Jim Wendt, for the record, just a point of clarification in that proposal. I want to point out, and it's in the staff comments, the third bullet in the staff comments, just a clarification that the affordable units as the regulation is proposed is for the life of the buildings. There was some concern raised at the hearing that there should be a minimum provision for 40 years. So as the regulation or as the potential condition is recommended in the third bullet, there would be, as you are suggesting, obviously subject to the Commission's consideration, changing that to 12%, but it would be for the life of the development, but in no case less than 40 years. So just to correct one minor issue, that should these buildings last beyond the 40 years, that affordability component does not extinguish at that point. That was a point that was made during the hearing that I think the applicant agreed to, and that's how we have recommended that. It's a minor tweak, but that's how the recommendation is proposed.
Thank you for jumping in there. And it was my intention to make that recommendation. So it's with that. I mean, if others have comments with respect to my comments or questions, or if Commissioner Noonan feels comfortable responding.
This is Commissioner Noonan. I'm not going to stand on the 10% or 12%. I said I supported the 10%, like I said earlier, for the reasons I stated. It just strikes me that I'm the one who said it was not a due process consider violation, nor is it. We're in our legislative capacity. It does strike me as somewhat of I don't want to say fairness issue, but I understand the applicant saying it's 10% of everywhere else. You're expecting 10%. making it 12 now, while you're able to, and you just seems, is a little unfair to the applicant. I see where they're coming from. That's why I would stick with the 10%. If the commission wants to do 12, I'm happy to make the amendment. But I would say, though, that we should however quick we can, if we're going to make this applicant go to 12, we should be making broader amendments for other districts to make it 12 as well, so that this applicant is not the only parcel in the town that's going to be having 12% affordable housing. Because Commissioner Francis is right, 10% is just keeping us floating at the current level we have, and we should be making efforts to go above that. But if the commission, I get the sense at least 3 or 4 are supportive of the 12%. And if that's the case, I will amend my motion so it reflects the 12%.
Very good. Well, I appreciate your comments, and I agree that if we're to make progress on additional affordable units as developments continue, around town, that there should be, an accretion of affordable units, over the 10% that we need, instead of treading water. So I think that would necessarily be in the context of a planning session, many of which we started in connection with the updates to the master plans and the TOD study, and the processes that we were heavily invested and involved in, which frankly, given the current state of affairs and the national emergency and quarantine and stay safe, stay home, of course, have impeded those operations. But I do think that should be a critical aspect of the affordable housing discussion, and I think we should take it up when we can. Now, having said all that, I think that now is a good time to start.
No, and I think that's the key, though, Commissioner, is that if we should be signaling to the applicant that this is not a one-time thing. This is a starting point. They essentially beat us to the punch, so to speak, and that we are making somewhat of a commitment to revisit the 10% town-wide.
Yeah.
Maybe not necessarily to move it, but at least make a commitment to discuss it. Because if we're going to, like I said, do it to this project, we really need to consider a town-wide analysis.
Any other commissioners have any follow-ups to any of that?
Commissioner, this Peter Elliott.
I would also.
Sorry.
Commissioner Elliott.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Elliott.
No, I agree.
Proceed.
Yes, I agree with the 12%. I just think it's to set the tone, and it should be something that we should be incorporating going forward. I think that is probably should be higher, but I think 12% is a good place to start, considering the deficit we're under now. And then, as far as the layout, I just feel like if we can readdress Building 5, seems to be the most problematic, where it is in the center of the development. If you build the apartments, that's going to act as kind of an anchor to draw, and that'll be kind of drawing the traffic and the people to the site, and then we can readdress how that center area is developed at a later date. I think that is after it's successful, and that shown that the apartments are I think we all believe that they're going to be successful, and there's a need there. So that's really all I had to add.
This is Jim Wendt. For the record, Mr. Chairman, just a housekeeping matter that I overlooked before we started this discussion is that Commissioner Braun had previously recused herself from this matter, and so Commissioner Elliott is online as an alternate to sit in her place. That was not, I don't believe we stated that before we started the discussion.
Right. Thank you very much for reminding me of that. And she actually had made her recusal at the last meeting, and Commissioner Elliott was on for this matter.
Yep.
So
Yep.
very good. Yeah, very, very good.
Yep.
Terrific. No, so Commissioner Elliott, thank you for those comments. I think you're voicing an agreement with the general sense that I have started here, which is that a 12% affordable with for the life of the building with a minimum in any event of 40 years is appropriate and with a clear indication of intent that we're going to take this up in connection with the wider town requirements, in other parts of town.
Right.
Commissioner Francis, do you need a motion, Mr. Chairman?
No, it's a friendly amendment. It's Commissioner Noonan it's his motion, and so at any time he can seek that. I mean, you can ask him directly. I've asked him, but it seems like we have a number of folks now.
This is Commissioner Noonan. Yes, so. I make the amendment from 10 to 12%.
10 to 12 with the proviso that it lasts for a minimum of 40 years, and for the life of the building, and in any event for a minimum of 40 years.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. And Commissioner Levy, I think you were the seconder on that.
I agree to that amendment. Second it.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else with respect to the amendments? Hearing none, are we ready to vote? All right. So the motion on the table is to approve with the condition, or with the amendment rather, to go from 10 to 12% for the life of the construction of the building in any event no less than 40 years. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes unanimously. All right, thank you, everyone. With that, then we should turn to the special permit and coastal site plan application. So here, as Mr. Wendt reviewed for all of us, we're looking at 357 dwelling units total. There are certain places in the trajectory of the development where the applicant must come back to us for special permits for additional commercial development. So I think we should get a motion on the table here and a second in order for us to start talking about this one.
This is Commissioner Noonan. I would move to approve with the conditions outlined by staff.
Very good. Motion to approve. And that was Commissioner Brayman?
No.
Noonan.
Noonan motion to approve with conditions as articulated by staff in the report, and a second by Commissioner Levy?
Correct.
Correct. Thank you. Okay, good. Thanks. Commissioner Noonan, you can start if you like.
Thank you, Chairman. For a lot of the reasons you, Mr. Chairman, have articulated, I felt that this was a good application. Certainly not a perfect one, but I thought it was a good application. Met the standards for special permits. I'm happy to listen to any of my colleagues if there are any issues or amendments that they have. But at the very least, it's a step in the right direction. It's a good step in the right direction, and I think will be a benefit for the town.
Thank you. Commissioner Levy?
I would agree. Nothing further.
Very good. Any other members of the commission? As, again, I can't see anybody, just please jump in. Just let me just announce yourself.
Yes, this is Commissioner Lee Brayman. I agree that this is in the main, this is a good project. I am in favor of a developer coming in willing to try to create mixed-use residential development and Metro Center in this fashion. I had concerns that I voiced during the hearings about the pedestrian friendliness of the development, which is one of the key aspects that we're trying to encourage with this kind of transit-oriented development. I sympathize with many of the concerns expressed by Commissioner Corcoran. I am hesitant to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I believe that there are sufficient safeguards in our ability to approve or deny subsequent special permit applications for the commercial developments for which little to no information has been given to us, such as the Point and the Concourse, to improve upon the project. I do want to be clear before I vote to approve the special permit coastal site plan exactly what I'm voting to approve. And so I think that the conditions are crucial. I think that my understanding is that we are not approving either of the commercial developments, either the Concourse or the Point. My understanding is that one of our conditions is that we are not approving anything past phase 3, if that is correct.
And we're not. Yeah, we're actually so. Just to really to make that a fine point, the hotel, a condition that we are imposing as part of the motion is that the hotel be completed no later than completion of residential building 2, which is phase 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, they have to come back to us with a special permit for additional commercial, at which point, if that moves forward, they can move forward with phase 3.
Thank you for the clarification. I'm reading the. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Wendt.
I'm sorry. This is Jim Wendt for the record. It's my understanding of what you're looking at is there are 5 residential buildings proposed in this application in the hotel. You're absolutely correct that you are not approving either of the commercial buildings, the Point or the Concourse. Those would be subject to an additional special permit. The only thing I'll say that's different from what the chair just indicated is that based on the math, the 70%, it's a 2-step thing. They can do the hotel has to come no later than completion of the 2nd residential building, but phase 3, they can do the 3rd residential building and still be compliant with the 70-30 ratio, assuming the hotel is done. Mm-hmm. It's at that point they can't move on to phase 4 or 5 without that special permit being that subsequent special permit being satisfied to your satisfaction. So the only difference between what the condition is proposing as written and what the chair indicated was they can actually do the 3rd residential building prior to the subsequent special permit.
Thank you, Mr. Wendt. And I'll just conclude my comments. I concluded during the hearings, and I'm open to other points of view, but it was my understanding that there was substantial testimony that issues with access between the future Concourse and Building 5 across Ash Creek Boulevard, improvements to the pedestrian friendliness of the development, its walkability, and the creation of the type of neighborhood that we would like to see in this area, perhaps have to await the construction, at least a special permit application for the Concourse and Building 5 because those will be the anchors, and that there is no ability for this commission to consider, a pedestrian crossing of Ash Creek Boulevard, for example, at this time. And so that, unfortunately, as much as we might like to see an entire master plan of how this entire thing will look, that is the ideal we are searching for, that we will have to wait, and that if our only choice is to deny the application before us because we can't see exactly how it will turn out when it comes back before us in the future, I would not deny it on that basis.
Thanks very much for your comments. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Corcoran?
Yeah. Hi, it's Commissioner Corcoran. I've been listening to your arguments. I agree with the conclusions that Lenny has come to, and I agree with Matt's analysis of taking what's available rather than what's perfect.
Okay, very good. Any other commissioners have any other comments or questions? Commissioner Wendt, Mr. Wendt, with respect to the ratio, and I apologize, Commissioner Brayman, for misstating the Phase 3 versus 4. Do you know what how close they come, like where that lands in terms of the ratio between commercial and residential once buildings 3, 2, and 4 are built?
Yes. The first, assuming the square footage of the hotel is as is proposed presently, they're able to build the first 3 residential buildings and maintain the 70-30 percentage. They can't move on to building 4. I believe they need at least another 30,000 square feet of commercial space to build building number 4, and then another supplemental amount of square footage. I don't have the number directly in front of me to get to building number 5. But the point being that they tap out at 70% when they complete building 3, assuming the hotel at that point is the only commercial development. They can't proceed to the phases 4 and 5, which are residential building number 1 and residential building number 5, unless they have that the point in the concourse building designed and approved.
Yeah, we said and or. I mean, would the point actually be a sufficient enough
the point
commercial
would
development in order to get them to moving forward?
The point building, if the percentages hold up, would be enough to get them to building number 4, but they can't get to building 5 without the concourse.
Yeah, and the 70-30 is part of the regulations. Okay, all right. I think that clarifies the phasing. Does anyone else have any other questions with respect to that?
Yeah, this is Stephen Levy. Are we are we in a sense approving the 5 buildings with the condition that they cannot proceed with 4 and 5 without coming back before us with a special permit application for the commercial development, which would be a precedent to their being able to go into precedent to their building 4 and 5?
Yeah. So the
correct?
second condition, yes, that's correct. The second condition of approval is it explicitly states that prior to the construction of phases 4 and 5, the disposition of a new special permit for the required additional commercial space must be resolved to the Commission's satisfaction. And they can't build new residential until they have that split, unless the mixed-use requirements are in practice, right? So just having the special permit granted doesn't mean that they can continue with new residential and just have the permit in their back pocket. They actually have to go forward with the development of the commercial space in order to maintain the mixed-use requirement, the 70-30 mixed-use requirement. Mr. Wendt, I have framed that properly, have I not?
Yes, that's correct.
Very good. Okay. I hope that provides enough clarification for everyone. Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay. So the motion on the table is to approve the application subject to the conditions as have been articulated in the staff report. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. The motion to approve with conditions is approved unanimously. Thank you, everyone. The next item on our agenda is zoning compliance, 338 Commerce Drive, application of Belize Hyundai for an overall sign plan in the Design Industrial District and the Commerce Drive District.
Okay. If you hopefully are near a computer and have your agenda open, there is a link that would allow you to view the proposal that Belize Hyundai has. It's consistent with what you saw before with the special exception application. Basically, as you recall, this site, there are two buildings. There's a service building to the rear of the property, and then there was a renovation to the front building to accommodate the dealership. So what's shown on the proposal are two building signs, two channel letter wall signs for the showroom up front, one on the street-facing side, one on the parking lot-facing side. The service building in the rear has one channel letter sign facing the street side, and then there was one monument sign for the dealership proposed. It's all consistent with what our regulations require, with one exception, that if you are to approve this, I would recommend that there needs to be a street number on the monument sign. Other than that, it's fully compliant.
Thank you very much. So with that, I trust everyone has reviewed the plans. And I think appropriate to move to approve with the condition for numerical designation on the sign.
Mr. Chairman, it's Mark. I move that we approve.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second.
Motion to approve by Commissioner Corcoran. Yeah, I just did. Is that Commissioner Braun? Was that Commissioner Braun seconding?
Oh, I'm unmuted now, so I'm seconding it. Sorry.
Excellent, thanks. So we have a motion to approve with the condition as stated by Commissioner Corcoran, seconded by Commissioner Braun. Any questions on this? All right, are we ready to vote? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay. Well, then the motion to approve with condition as stated it passes unanimously. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing. 3135 Eastern Turnpike and 95 Congress Street, special exception application of the Town of Fairfield pertaining to the construction of a new replacement sewer pump station in the R3 zone.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Jim Wendt. For the record, this is a little bit uncharted territory and a new venue for the conference call here. There is a link, again, on the agenda that you have that links to a PowerPoint presentation that was prepared by Wright Pierce, the engineering firm engaged by the town. And I believe on the line we may have, hopefully we have a representative from Wright Pierce to kind of walk you through that PowerPoint that's linked to the agenda. So with that, I will turn it over to hopefully our Wright Pierce representative. Hello, is Dennis on the line? Or Chris Rogers, perhaps?
Star 6.
Oh, I'm here. This is Dennis. I apologize.
Oh, all right. Very good. Go ahead. Just identify again your name for the record, and then you can walk through the PowerPoint presentation.
Sure. This is Dennis Divert from Wright Pierce. I will, if everyone has the slides opened, there's 10 slides. You can see on the first slide there's a photograph. That photograph represents the existing sewer pump station. There are two buildings. The building on the left is the pump house itself, and the building on the right is there's a generator inside that building. So the town has hired Wright Pierce to design the upgrade of the pump station to accommodate the expansion of Sacred Heart University on the former GE property. The second slide just talks about what the purpose of this public hearing is, and the slides and the information I will go through. The application is a special exception for Section 27. The statement of use that was provided with the application is included in one of these slides. I'll briefly describe the project and some of the building features, and then answer any questions that anyone has. So the third slide is the aerial view of Easton Turnpike. There's a red cloud around the existing pump station. The new pump station will be located in the same location as the existing, slightly behind the existing building. And in this area, you could see its relationship of the parcel, the property to Easton Turnpike, and also to the Jefferson Street and the entry to Sacred Heart, the Sacred Heart campus. Slide 4, just a summary of the application. Again, the existing pump station is currently located on split between two parcels, 3135 Easton Turnpike, which is now owned by Sacred Heart, just 68-acre parcel, and 95 Congress Street, which is owned by the state of Connecticut, which is a 3.26-acre parcel. The existing buildings, as shown in the photograph on the cover slide, one is a 15-foot by 13 by 14-foot high pump house. It's about 195 square feet. And the second is a single floor, 144 square foot, 12 by 12 building that houses a generator. The proposed building, those two buildings will be replaced with one building, 20 foot by 28 foot by 16 foot high. It's about 540 square foot, slab on grade. Fifth slide. Up until now, we've completed the Town of Fairfield Code Enforcement meeting we had in December 17th, 2019. Certificate of wetland conformance was issued and approved by Conservation on January 23rd, 2020, and certificate number 2019-20-58. And the project was also approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals. Public hearing was on February 6th of 2020. Slide 6 is the statement of use. I'll just repeat the slide. So currently the town of Fairfield owns and operates the Easton Turnpike Sewer Pump Station located at 3135 Easton Turnpike. The existing pump station was constructed in 1969 and is split by two parcels. One is owned by Sacred Heart and the other by the state of Connecticut. The town leases a section of the parcel from Sacred Heart University and is allowed to operate as a utility on the portion of the state-owned parcel. Since I prepared these slides, the town attorney is currently in negotiations with Sacred Heart to obtain a permanent lease for this pump station. So the current lease expires this month. The lease will be replaced with a permanent easement. So that's all in the works. I don't really have any updates on that, Chris May, if you're interested. So again, the pump station constructed in 1969, nothing really has been done to it since then, so it's in need of an upgrade, and it will be sized and constructed to accommodate the additional growth proposed and approved for Sacred Heart, and also some surrounding parcels in the area. The existing pump station structures will be completely demolished and a new structure will be built. The use will be a sewer pump station that will continue to convey wastewater to the town of Fairfield's water pollution control plant for treatment. Slide 7. What this slide attempts to do is to show the existing buildings and then the new building. So you see sort of that diagonal line that cuts from the page north down to this page south. That's the actual property line. So everything on the right of that property line is the Sacred Heart property, 3135 Easton Turnpike, and everything to the left of that is state of Connecticut property. You see the two faded back rectangular or square structures and with the circles inside. Those are the existing buildings. The new building is the larger rectangular structure on the left, and those two structures on the right are below grade structures. They are valve pits and the actual vessel which collects all the wastewater for it then to be pumped by the pump station. So those are two on the right are both at grade. And slide 8 is a sort of a rendering of the building itself. It will be the building will be constructed of CMU block with a brick facade. It will be real brick. The brick will be selected. The color of the brick and the size of the brick will be selected by the town during construction. The asphalt shingled roof, the color of the asphalt shingles will be selected by the town during construction. There are doors. The doors on the building, the color that those doors will be painted will be selected by the town during construction. And it has some exterior, there's some exterior light fixtures on there which are represented on slide 9. They're exterior LED wall pack lighting. If you don't like those, we can certainly provide whatever lighting the town would like to see on the building. And then just so everyone knows, the project was bid prior to the COVID-19 situation because we were shooting to have the new pump station online in September when Sacred Heart came back to school, but none of that is going to happen. But it still is a critical path project. So with that, I will open it up to any questions that anyone has.
Thanks very much. I have a question about this is Commissioner Wagner, about the lease agreement with Sacred Heart. Does the town actually pay Sacred Heart a monthly rent to lease this space on a parcel for this?
I couldn't answer that. I don't know. Chris, do you know the answer to that? I believe the answer to that is no, but I'm not 100% sure. Chris Rogers?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. No, I do not believe the town does not pay a lease for it. I believe it was a $1 lease agreement, and the lease has since expired on the 20th of April. So we are in the works now to acquire a new permanent easement on that property.
Permanent easement, yes?
Yes, correct.
Okay, good. Thank you. And then with respect to the lighting, are these two alternatives? One is an open face and the other is downward facing?
I believe it's, yes. I mean, it's the same fixture. We haven't selected one. They could be selected by the town when the contractor begins construction. So, yes, one faces out. I guess you're right. One faces out, one faces down. Yep.
Yeah. So I think any lighting should be dark sky compliant and directed downward, consistent with our lighting regulations.
Sure.
I'm not clear on the plans exactly how many and where they are.
There's 3 lights over the door. There's a light over each door, and then there's a light on the I guess it's the south side faces the Sacred Heart property, where the operators may potentially need to get out there at night to go down into the valve pit. So there'll be 4 lights.
Right.
5 lights, sorry. 2 on the side.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other commissioners have any questions or comments? No, not comments. Questions. All right. Hearing none, I'll thank you very much for your Mr. Wendt, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So thanks very much for the presentation. Go ahead.
Just for clarity, Mr. Chairman, Jim Wendt, I unmuted anybody that might be on the call. So in the event that there's someone that wishes to be heard at this point, perhaps we could just suggest if they just say their name and then we can call them.
Yeah, that's what I was planning on doing. And now that you have done that unmute, we've got some pleasant jazz in the background. So I just remind everyone that even though you don't think you are, you're actually all sitting in the McKinley Elementary School all-purpose room, and that we can hear everything that's going on in your homes. Getting back to business. So that will conclude the applicant's presentation, and at this point we'll go into a public hearing, public comment. Uncharted territory, as Mr. Wendt said, and we don't really have presently a system where people can raise their hands. Which, as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, we're investigating other solutions and planning to implement, a more sophisticated platform here where folks can actually remotely see the commissioners and then raise your hand or, get into a queue for public comments. But for now, if any members of the public wish to be heard on this item, if you could just jump in here and state your name, and we'll get a list together, and then we'll call everybody one by one. Any members of the public wish to be heard? Well, Mr. Wendt, we picked a really good one to get started with.
Well, that was part of the plan that we didn't didn't expect that there would be a huge interest in this, but certainly wanted to make a provision for folks to comment should they want to.
Yeah, without a doubt. So just to be sure that we're getting everyone. You've unmuted collectively all of the people that have signed into the call.
That is correct.
Annette Jacobson is here just to test if you want to test. I don't want to ask a question.
Excellent.
Well, that will confirm that. Thank you for confirming that you can speak. Yes.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. Are you? And thank you, Ms. Jacobson, for chiming in there. Appreciate that. All right, then. No member of the public looking to be heard here. I would throw it back over to the applicant for a rebuttal, but there is nothing to rebut. Therefore, I will close the public hearing on this item. And that being the last item of business, I will adjourn the meeting unless I hear Mr. Wendt jumping in.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but Jim Wendt for the record. Before you do, I don't know, again, we don't have another meeting yet scheduled, although we are trying to get something together. Hopefully we might be able to keep our May schedule depending on how our other platforms are proceeding. I just wanted to know, given the nature of this proposal, whether or not you wanted to give some consideration to voting on this evening rather than holding it off, since it's a town project that's gone through the funding cycle, and this is the last step before they can actually proceed with development. Up to you.
Frankly, it doesn't appear to be all that controversial. No, I think that's a good point. I mean, and these are extraordinary times. Our general policy, as I think everyone knows, is that we follow a normal routine of hearing items and then taking them up for consideration in the executive session at our next meeting. And it serves a number of purposes, not the least of which is that we all have an opportunity to consider the information in the application as it's been presented by the applicant. But in certain, relatively rare instances, we have considered applications in an executive session the same night that we hear them. And that's not unprecedented. Other towns actually do that as more of a routine. And so we are within our zone of permissible action, to do that. These are extraordinary times, and since we don't have, a read on when the next meeting would be, and it doesn't seem to be a controversial project, and the funding's been allocated and so forth. I mean, I think that's an excellent suggestion. So, I mean, with all that having been said, I'll entertain a motion to go back into executive session to consider and decide 3135. I got to go back to my whatever it is. 3135 Easton Turnpike and 95 Congress Street.
This is Mark.
Motion.
Okay. I heard Commissioner Corcoran make such a motion. Yes.
Yes. Commissioner Noonan seconds.
Okay. Commissioner Noonan second. All right. So now the motion on the table is to go back into executive session to hear and consider 3135 Easton Turnpike and 95 Congress. Does anybody have any questions? Any discussion on that?
Nope.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
I need a motion. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so the motion to go back into executive session passes unanimously. The first item and only item of business is 3135 Easton Turnpike, 95 Congress Street, special exception application of the town of Fairfield pertaining to the construction of a new replacement sewer pump station in the R3 zone. Mr. Wendt, you want to give us a summary?
I don't know that one is warranted, but if you would, but I'm happy to.
I'm joking.
No, I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Commissioner Noonan moves to approve. I would let me just, in light of that, let me just preface that I have a question for Mr. Wendt before we go. With respect to the lighting, one of them is exposed and the other one is down. I mean,
no,
you
make a good point. Again, Jim Wendt for the record. I would recommend, in light of that concern in the regulation, that a reasonable condition of approval would be that the light fixture chosen would be limited to the downward-facing fixture.
Okay, and then the second condition of approval, possibly that they obtain. I mean, that an easement, a permanent easement, be granted by the owner of 3135 in favor of the town of Fairfield. In
my opinion, I think that's self-regulating. But yes, we can. I think confirmation of submittal of the executed easement would be a reasonable condition.
I think that's right. And to the extent that they're a co-applicant, they're in possession of the ability to make that happen. So I think that's fair. All right, so Mr. Noonan, we have two recommended conditions of approval. You seconded.
Yes.
Commissioner Corcoran, we have two recommended conditions of approval. Is that your motion?
Actually, Tom made the motion, and I don't think it's been
Tom made the motion. All right, I appreciate that.
I make the motion with recommended conditions.
Thanks. And Commissioner Corcoran?
I'll second that.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments on this one, guys?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Stephen Levy.
Commissioner Levy, go ahead.
Whether we need to specify whether it's an easement or a lease, I mean, that's something the town attorney will have to negotiate. And I don't know that we need it as a condition, since if they don't have authority to enter upon the land in either fashion, it's not going to happen. So I guess it's twofold. Do we want to limit it to easement, or just easement or lease? And then number two, do we really feel we need that condition?
Well, yeah, so I appreciate the question. So my view is that the situation we are in presently is the function of not demanding a permanent utility easement in favor of the town of Fairfield when a pump station was installed in the first place. I find it kind of miraculous, frankly, that the pump station was built on, a leased land in combination with town land. I mean, why would we do that with an expiration date? Did we not think that the sewer was going to be needed after April of 2020?
Well, were we dealing with GE then?
Well, we may have been, but regardless, the owner of the parcel, 3135, it doesn't make sense to me that that the town should be limited to a finite lease arrangement for the installation of public utilities, particularly a pump station, for a finite period of time. So I would suggest that entirely appropriate, particularly since the owner of 3135 is a co-applicant here, that a permanent easement be granted, that evidence of the permanent easement, which was presented at the public hearing, be granted as a condition of approval, be presented to us as a condition of approval.
I have another comment.
Yes.
Do we have any issue with the other parcel, which is state-owned and not town-owned?
No, this is Jim Wendt for the record. They did receive a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals because the building straddles the property line, but I believe the testimony was that they don't need to lease it, that it's permitted there as a utility within the state's right-of-way.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Is that it's similar. So, and that would actually, and so requiring the easement would also coincide with the easement that exists with respect to the state right-of-way. So I think that all counsels us in favor of requiring the permanent easement.
One thought.
It could be a permanent license. I'm just a little concerned about specifying something where the town may, for instance, want to negotiate a quick 100-year lease or a license running with the land as opposed to a property right, which is an easement.
This is Lenny Brayman. If we were to table this matter until our next meeting, would not perhaps the easement issue be resolved in the interim?
Well, it could be, but I can just tell you from my own experience that the town has utility easements all over the place. I mean, when the town requires egress and access to private land for the purpose of public utilities, it's in the form of an easement. I have one on my own property. I don't grant the town a lease. Mr. Wendt, is it your experience that the town receives easements for the purposes of the public utilities as opposed to lease agreements?
Jim Wendt, for the record, I believe there's been occasions for both. I mean, obviously under the past history, it was an easement with an expiration. Now they're endeavoring to get a permanent easement rather than, it was a lease with an expiration, and now they're endeavoring to get a permanent easement. I don't know that. I think you could leave it open-ended and just say submission of the executed right to have the facility, whether that be an easement or a lease or any other methodology that would cover it. But
that's fair. But in perpetuity, I mean, or some such language, or for a minimum of 100 years. I mean, I like the 100 years. We're probably going to need new sewers by then.
Yeah. Again, I would recommend the submission of the executed, permission, permanent permission document, whatever document that may be.
All right. That works for me. Does that work for you, Commissioner Levy?
It does.
All right. Excellent. Good point. Thank you. All right. So, who was it? Commissioner Corcoran?
I amend my motion as we discussed.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Noonan.
And
I think it was Commissioner Corcoran second. Good. So we've got sign off from both of you. All right. Good. Any other questions, comments? All right. Hearing none. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? All right. So the application is with conditions as stated is approved unanimously. And that concludes our business. Thanks, everyone. I hope everyone stays safe, stays well, and we will be in touch very soon with some plans for our next meeting.
All right. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Francis.
Pretty soon we're going to need a new zoning regulation book. I've got 4 inserts, and tonight's is the 5th.
Oh, well, yes,
okay.
we will. Again, we will. I'm sorry, Jim Wendt. When we've got this all amended, we will make new books for you. Yes, that's a good point. That's easily accomplished.
Thank you.
Terrific. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you
all
all
right,
for your
anybody
patience.
Else have any other business? Any other questions? Again, I can't see anybody, so. All right, hearing none, I will adjourn the meeting. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Bye.
Take care.